Have you ever imagined standing before a man on the brink of death, and with his final breaths he looks into your eyes and entrusts you with the most precious object he carries? We're not talking just about iron and gunpowder, but about something much greater: responsibility, courage, and destiny. This is the scene that unfolded on a silent afternoon in the Old West, when Jedediah Cole, a cowboy scarred by time, the dust of the roads, and the battles he'd fought in his life, fell wounded to the dirt road. He no longer had the strength to carry on, but he still found enough strength within himself to reach out and hand his gun to a frail boy named Samuel Carter, or as everyone in Redstone knew him, simply Sam. Imagine this moment: the sun setting on the horizon, tinting the sky orange, the smell of gunpowder still in the air, and the town watching from afar, daring not to approach. Old Jedediah, breathing shallowly and with teary eyes, hands the boy something that is not just a gun, but a symbol of trust and legacy. And then I ask you, what would you do in Sam's place? Would you run for cover? Or would you have the courage to shoulder the weight of responsibility a dying cowboy had just placed in your hands? This isn't just a story of cowboys and duels. It's a story of courage, of how unexpected encounters can change destinies forever. And I want you to stay with me until the end, because what happened after that moment left the entire town of Redstone in absolute silence. Some called it a miracle, others madness, but everyone knew they were witnessing the birth of a legend. Interestingly, the Old West wasn't just about gunslingers and sheriffs. It was about lonely men bearing invisible scars, orphans learning too early the weight of choices, and entire towns living between fear and hope. Redstone was one of those towns, small, isolated, with wooden streets creaking under the weight of boots, and a saloon always filled with suspicious voices. But it was in this seemingly ordinary setting that an extraordinary event came to life, an episode that still resonates today as a lesson in courage and compassion. Sam was no hero. He didn't have the strength of a grown man, nor the experience of someone who had wielded a weapon. He was just a boy who helped in the stables, cared for horses, and dreamed of a different life, far from the constant fear that haunted the Redstone nights. But that day, fate presented him with a choice that would change not only his life, but that of the entire town. And perhaps you recognize yourself in this story. Who hasn't faced a moment when they had to decide between retreating or moving forward, between hiding behind fear or facing what seemed impossible? What you're about to discover may surprise you, because when Jedediah Cole entrusted his gun to Samuel Carter, no one, absolutely no one, could have imagined the courage that would emerge from such a young boy. The scene seemed like something out of one of those tales old cowboys like to tell on cold nights, but no, it was real. The ground marked by Jedediah's blood, the heavy silence that hung over the town, Sam's frightened look as he gripped his gun with trembling hands. Everything pointed to a tragic outcome, but it's precisely when hope seems to fade that the greatest stories of the West come to life. And this is where the true turning point in this narrative begins. Because what Samuel Carter did next not only stunned the residents of Redstone, but also resonated as a lesson for entire generations. A lesson about courage, honor, and the strength that can be born in the most unlikely places. Now take a deep breath, because the next part of this story will take you into one of the most intense moments the Old West has ever seen. And perhaps as you imagine this moment, when a boy faces the weight of a decision he didn't ask for, something inside you will awaken. Because deep down, each of us has experienced a similar moment, not in the wild West, of course, but in real life, when someone placed an unexpected trust in us, a challenge that seemed bigger than us. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt that butterflies in your stomach when faced with a responsibility that seemed impossible? If so, share with me in the comments, because your story can inspire others who are here now. Your participation is what makes this space come to life and become a true community of people who believe in the power of courage and choice. And since we're on this journey together, I want to ask you for something simple, but it makes all the difference. Please like this video. It may seem small, but when you do this, you're helping spread stories like this to many more people who need to hear about honor, courage, and humanity in such difficult times. It's a gesture of support that gives me the strength to continue bringing these stories and keep the flame of this channel alive. And if this kind of content resonates with you, if you Believe that stories from the Old West hold timeless lessons that still resonate today? I wholeheartedly invite you to subscribe to the channel. This way, you'll walk alongside me through each new story, each new reflection, and ensure you don't miss a single detail of the journeys ahead. Your subscription is more than a number. It's a sign that you're also part of this purpose of keeping alive stories that deserve to be told, because ultimately, it's your participation that gives all this meaning. Without you, this story would be just a voice in the desert, but with you, it resonates, grows, and reaches more and more people. So get ready, because what comes next in Samuel Carter's journey will move you even more. The town of Redstone seemed at first glance just another lost dot on the dusty map of the Wild West. Dirt streets, wooden houses creaking in the wind, church bells echoing as a reminder of faith amidst the chaos, and the saloon, always crowded, where suspicious and voices mingled with the clink of glasses and improvised music on the time-worn piano. But there was something deeper hidden behind this routine, a hidden truth that few had the courage to face. Redstone was not just a town, it was a reflection of conflicting mentalities, a space where wrong decisions could cost lives, and where each choice left an impact that lasted far beyond the moment. The sheriff, overwhelmed by responsibilities he couldn't fulfill alone, was seen walking with heavy steps, as if carrying the weight of all the community's past mistakes. The common citizens, meanwhile, lived between fear and hope, hoping that the next night wouldn't bring back the bandits who stalked them like constant shadows. It was against this tense backdrop that the story of Jedediah Cole and Samuel Carter unfolded, a perfect backdrop to reveal how the courage of a single individual can transform an entire community. Think for a moment. How many times have you been in an environment where fear seemed to dominate everything? Situations where people's silence spoke louder than 1,000 words? In Redstone, every suspicious look carried the memory of robberies, ambushes, and violence that came without warning. But it is precisely in these desperate shadows that the greatest examples of transformation emerge. Because when everything seems to be falling apart, when no one believes it's possible to turn things around, there's always someone willing to break the mold, even if that someone is just a boy with shaky hands. The dust of Redstone streets didn't just hide footprints, it hid stories. The metallic sound of spurs hitting the ground, the rustling of window curtains, and even the hurried slamming of locked doors at dusk revealed a community living on the brink of uncertainty. It's curious how every detail, no matter how small, holds a revelation about life. There, in the heart of the West, was written the portrait of a society that still didn't know how to deal with its own ghosts, but was about to be shaken by an unexpected decision. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was at stake in Redstone wasn't just the fight against armed bandits. It was the fight against collective fear, against the mentality of always expecting someone stronger to come and solve problems. When Jedediah fell before Sam and handed him his gun, it wasn't just a gesture of desperation, but a kind of call, almost a silent revelation that the most impactful changes don't come from without, but from within. That weapon, worn by time, symbolized more than defense. It represented confidence, purpose, and the chance for a boy to discover that his worth lay not in his age, but in the courage to face what life threw at him. It's on this journey that Redstone begins to show his true colors. A city that seemed doomed to a repeat of fear was about to witness how one decision, even one made amidst insecurity, could become a turning point for everyone. And if you stop and think about it, that's exactly how it works off-screen too. It's the small choices made in moments of doubt that hold the power to open unexpected paths. Jedediah Cole wasn't just another man lost in the West. His name was passed around the saloons, sometimes as a legend, sometimes as a threat. They called him the Silent Gunslinger, and that nickname wasn't for nothing. He rarely wasted words, but when he spoke, each sentence seemed to carry an almost prophetic weight, as if he'd lived 1,000 lives in one. Respected by some, feared by others, he walked the dusty roads like someone who knew secrets few would dare reveal. One look was enough to reveal a hidden truth within him, a baggage of difficult decisions and invisible scars no one could erase. Jedediah's eyes reflected a profound weariness, but also a frightening firmness. It wasn't the firmness of someone who had never made a mistake, but of someone who had paid dearly for his mistakes. Some said he had killed more men than he could count. Others claimed that behind the scars lay a man who simply desired peace. This duality created a profound impact on those who approached him. Some felt safe in his presence, believing that if he were nearby, danger would be kept at bay. But there were also those who saw in him a cruel reminder that the West spared no one. And it was precisely this mixture of respect and fear that made his figure so enigmatic. Behind the scenes of his story lay revelations that few dared discuss. It was as if every decision Jedediah made left an invisible trail, building a journey marked by redemption and regret at the same time. He was living proof that a man's mindset could be shaped by the choices he made, and also by the inevitable consequences they brought. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Jedediah's silence wasn't just an absence of words, it was a symbol. He had learned that speaking less and acting more could mean the difference between life and death. But beyond that, there was also the psychological weight of everything he carried. Each scar was a reminder of decisions that could not be undone. And perhaps it was precisely this accumulation of experiences, of mistakes and successes, that made him so unique. He was neither a hero nor a villain. He was human, a man who lived between extremes and who, deep down, seemed to be always searching for a transformation that never quite arrived. His footsteps echoed, as if carrying untold stories. The way he gazed into the distance gave the impression he was searching for something he had lost long ago. Those who knew him said there was a hidden pain in his silence, and that this pain shaped his actions. But this hidden truth was never fully revealed, and perhaps it was this mystery that made Jedediah Cole so unforgettable, because, in the end, the silent gunman was remembered not only for the precision of his shots, but for the intensity of his presence. His life was a clear example of how choices shape destiny. He carried in his eyes the impact of a journey made up of battles, losses, and small victories that no one else saw. And it is precisely in this contrast between respect and fear that the essence of who he truly was lies. The ambush happened so quickly that no one had time to react. The sun was already low, painting the streets of Redstone with that reddish hue that always heralded the end of another day in the west. Jedediah Cole walked, alone as usual, his hat partially covering his face, and the steady stride of someone who had crossed many deserts and carried the dust of past battles on his boots. It was then that the shadows appeared. 3 outlaws, known for spreading fear in the region, hid in the narrow alleys and, when they had the opportunity, opened fire on the silent gunslinger. The sound of gunfire echoed off the wooden walls, making the windows shake and the hearts of the residents shrink in silence. Jedediah tried to fight back, but the ambush was treacherous. A bullet tore through his shoulder, another grazed his ribs. Still, he managed to take down one of the attackers with precision, proving that, even weakened, his reputation as a marksman was not merely legendary. But the weight of years and scars was taking its toll. The man so many feared now staggered, his gaze heavy, his body crying out for rest. And it was at that moment, amid the dust kicked up by the horse's hooves, that fate decided to present Samuel Carter. Sam was just an orphan boy who tended the horses in the stable. His days were marked by the smell of hay, the creak of wooden gates, and the silent work of cleaning horseshoes and feeding animals that weren't his. He grew up far from the affection of a family, but he learned early the value of responsibility, even when no one recognized him for it. That late afternoon, upon hearing the gunshots, he ran into the street, driven more by curiosity than courage. And what he found changed the course of his life forever. Jedediah lay on the ground, bleeding but still conscious. His eyes, which had so often intimidated enemies and commanded respect from allies, now stared into those of a frail boy with dirty straw clothes and calloused hands. There was a kind of silent revelation in that gaze. It wasn't just the weight of pain. It was as if Jedediah knew this encounter hadn't been a coincidence, but a piece of something larger, an unexpected link in his journey. Imagine the scene. The silent gunman, feared by so many, fallen before a boy who had never held a gun in his life. The contrast was almost poetic. The man, marked by the past and the weight of decisions, found himself face to face with someone who still had his whole life ahead of him, someone whose mindset could still be shaped, someone who bore no scars, but carried within him an empty space ready to be filled with purpose. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, Because what happened? There wasn't just the meeting of two different destinies. It was the clash of two hidden truths. On the one hand, Jedediah carrying regrets he never had the courage to confess, and on the other, Sam living on the margins, invisible to the town, as if he didn't matter at all. But when a man on the brink of death and a boy forgotten by the world meet, something powerful happens. It's as if life reveals, behind the scenes of pain, a rare opportunity for transformation. Sam didn't immediately understand what was happening. His heart was racing, his eyes wide in disbelief, but inside him something began to shift. It was as if, in that moment, the weight of the decision that lay ahead was already being placed on his shoulders. And perhaps that's exactly what makes a journey so impactful. It's not just the great feats that define it, but the small, unexpected moments that confront us with choices we didn't ask for, but are forced to face. The sound of Jedediah's breathing was no longer the same. Each breath seemed wrenched from him, as if the air was fighting to stay inside a body that was slowly giving up. Blood dripped down the torn fabric of his shirt, staining the dust on the floor, but his eyes remained steady, fixed on Sam. There was no fear in that look, only a silent urgency, as if he knew that this moment would define something much greater than his own life. Sam, motionless, didn't know whether to reach out to help or recoil from the gravity of the scene. He was just a boy accustomed to the smell of horses and the weight of buckets of water, but in that moment he realized he was facing something he would never fully comprehend. Jedediah raised his hand with effort, and in it he held his gun. The revolver didn't shine like it did in the stories told in saloons. On the contrary, the metal was worn, scarred by time, as if it carried the memory of every shot, every battle, every life that had ever been touched by that trigger. But for Jedediah, it wasn't just a tool of war. And that's why, with a weak, hoarse voice, he murmured, "Sam, this gun isn't just metal, it's trust. Promise me you'll only use it for what's right." Those words pierced the boy like a bolt of lightning. Sam had never held a real gun. Until that moment, guns were only distant objects, seen from afar when drunken men displayed power in the streets. Now, suddenly, that responsibility was in his hands, as if the weight of destiny had fallen upon him without warning. He hesitated, looking around, trying to find a way out, but all he found were Jedediah's steady eyes, asking for something that went beyond courage, asking for purpose. The silence between them was charged with meaning. There was, in that moment, a hidden truth that few people in the world could understand. It wasn't about the cold metal nor the violence it could cause. It was about choices, about mindset, about the transformation that occurs when someone hands us something valuable and says, without needing many words, that they trust us. For Sam, this was more than frightening. It was almost as if he had been ripped from his ordinary life and faced with a revelation that would change everything from then on. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because Jedediah's gesture wasn't just about weapons and battles. It was about trust, legacy, and impact. He showed that often what we receive from others is loaded with stories we haven't lived, but which we need to honor. And deep down, isn't that the case with every decision we make? There's always a hidden backdrop behind the choices we make, a sequence of mistakes, successes, and scars that shape the present. What Jedediah passed on to Sam wasn't just a physical object, but the sum total of an entire journey, marked by mistakes and lessons learned. Sam took a deep breath, feeling his hands tremble. The cold touch of the revolver seemed to scream against his skin. He knew he wasn't just a boy facing a dying man. He was someone who, in that moment, had to decide whether or not to accept the responsibility offered to him. And with each passing second, it became clearer that there was no escaping the impact of that surrender. Sam felt the weight of the revolver in his hands, as if it were not just iron and gunpowder, but an invisible burden threatening to crush his fragile shoulders. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum in the heavy silence that enveloped Redstone Street. At 12, he had never imagined facing such a cruel choice: hold the gun and face a fate he didn't understand, or drop everything and run, as most expected a boy his age to do. Running was the easy way out, and the thought flashed through his mind. All he had to do was release the cold metal, turn his back, and let his problems remain the responsibility of adults. but Jedediah's weakened voice still rang in his memory, urging him to honor his trust. And it was in that moment that Sam realized he wasn't just holding a gun, but a promise. And a promise in the West was as valuable as life itself. He knew he could live forever under the shadow of fear, but he also understood that some opportunities, even when frightening, opened doors to transformation that could never be achieved otherwise. The dilemma grew greater by the second, as if he were standing before a mirror showing two versions of himself: the boy who would continue tending horses in the stable, invisible to the city, or the young man who would step forward and prove that courage isn't measured by age, but by the decision to face the impossible. Sam's eyes filled with tears, not just from fear, but from the hidden truth that was beginning to reveal itself. He realized it wasn't just Jedediah's life that was at stake. There was something bigger, some kind of collective impact hidden in that scene. If he ran, he would confirm what everyone thought, that Redstone was doomed to silence and cowardice. But if he stayed, if he found within himself a shred of courage, he could change not only his own journey, but also the mindset of an entire city. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what Sam faced was not unlike the dilemmas anyone has faced at some point in their life. The feeling of being faced with a path-dividing choice that can mark one forever. The temptation to choose comfort, to follow the simpler path, and the silent call to something greater, demanding sacrifice but also carrying the chance for transformative revelations. Behind the scenes of a 12-year-old boy's mind, an invisible battle raged, where every thought was a weapon as powerful as the one he held in his hands. The wind blew hard, stirring up dust from the street, and for a moment it seemed as if even the city itself awaited his decision. The silence was absolute, and Sam understood he was facing a moment that could never be erased. There were no manuals, no one to hold his hand. It was him, his promise, and Jedediah's almost faded gaze, placing all his trust in a frail boy. And perhaps that was precisely what made that moment so momentous. The truth that courage is born when everything seems to say, "We can't." The following hours seemed to carry a different weight in Redstone. The silence that gripped the town wasn't that of an ordinary night, but rather that of someone fearfully awaiting the return of violence. Everyone knew the men who had ambushed Jedediah wouldn't be satisfied. The first attack had been merely a warning, a cruel message that Redstone was vulnerable. In the alleys, in the wooden houses, and even in the saloon, a sense of helplessness reigned. The doors were locked, the windows shuttered, and gazes were hidden behind curtains that fluttered in the wind. Amidst it all, Sam remained motionless, clutching the gun Jedediah had given him, as if fate had placed the most difficult decision of his short life on his shoulders. The dilemma that had previously seemed internal now became something tangible. The echoes of the bandits' horses' hooves returning to town mingled with the sound of Sam's own heart, racing, trying to find a rhythm that would keep him steady. The natural instinct of a 12-year-old was to run, to hide, to pretend none of this concerned him, but something new was burning inside him, something that came not from strength, but from promise. The memory of Jedediah's weakened voice repeated like a mantra, "This gun isn't just metal, it's trust." And even though fear gripped every muscle, that word, trust, echoed louder than any gunshot. When the armed men once again roared through the streets of Redstone, shaking the ground beneath their hooves and spreading terror with their threatening shouts, no one dared react. People remained trapped in their homes, prisoners of the dread that had become routine. And it was precisely in this paralyzed environment that the unexpected happened. Sam, his hands trembling, raised his weapon in front of the enemy. A simple gesture, but it shattered the city's silence like a clap of thunder. No one could believe their eyes. A frail boy, barefoot and frightened, daring to face grown men accustomed to killing without a second thought. But it wasn't the strength of his arms that caught everyone's attention, but the intensity of the moment. There was a kind of revelation in that gesture that cannot be explained in words. Courage, born in a small body, yet charged with an impact capable of awakening even the most hardened hearts. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because this turning point wasn't just about Sam raising a gun. It was about the invisible transformation that happens when someone decides to break free from the logic of fear. It wasn't about being strong or experienced, but about choosing not to let terror continue to dictate the rules. Sam, without realizing it, was challenging not only the bad guys, but also the mindset that had imprisoned Redstone for so long. He was showing, albeit without words, that there was another way to approach life, taking responsibility, even when all seems lost. And this is a fascinating detail of the human journey. Often, behind the scenes of the most desperate situations, it is the unexpected action of someone unlikely that opens the way for change. And this impact is so powerful because it reveals a hidden truth. Age, size, or social position don't matter. What truly matters are decisions. Each choice can be the spark that ignites a collective transformation, capable of altering not only the trajectory of one person, but of everyone who witnesses this act. In that moment, Sam stopped being just the orphaned boy from the stable. He became a symbol of something the entire town needed to see. The residents' silence, which had previously been a sign of fear, was now a sign of astonishment. It was as if everyone had been awakened by a scene impossible to ignore. The moment Sam raised his gun seemed to have stopped time in Redstone. The creak of the wind through the cracks in the houses and the distant echo of horses' hooves were the only sounds that dared to exist. Men accustomed to calling themselves brave, and women who had long learned to hide in silence, were now faced with a scene that defied all logic. A frail boy, barely 12 years old, stared down the bandits as if he carried within him the strength of an invisible army. The impact of that image was so intense that no one dared to breathe. Loudly, as if even the air respected what was happening. From inside the windows, faces began to appear, frightened eyes trying to believe what they were seeing. It was as if every person in the city carried the same unspoken question: how is this possible? Many there had witnessed Jedediah face danger and knew of the fame surrounding him, but they never imagined that the silent gunman, upon his fall, would pass the baton to someone so unlikely. And precisely for this reason, the scene had a power greater than any speech. It revealed raw and true that courage doesn't choose age or appearance, but is born from the meeting of necessity and decision. Sam was trembling, of course. The hand holding the revolver betrayed his fear, but there was something in his gaze that no one could ignore. It wasn't bravado, it wasn't arrogance. It was that quiet flame that emerges when someone decides to face their own vulnerability. And this flame, however small it seemed, illuminated something deep in the hearts of everyone watching hidden. The boy wasn't just facing the bandits, he was facing the city itself, showing that the mentality of always waiting for someone else to solve the problem could be broken. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the town's reaction wasn't just one of surprise, it also carried the weight of revelation. Behind the scenes of collective fear, Redstone had grown accustomed to living under the sway of threats, accepting that silence was the only way to survive. But when a child stood up to face what everyone avoided, a transformation began to take place. The adults, who so often believed they had no choice, saw in Sam's gesture an uncomfortable mirror. It was as if the hidden truth everyone was afraid to admit had been laid bare. Cowardice didn't stem solely from the criminals, but from the conformity of an entire community. The impact of that moment was immediate. An older man, peering through the half-open door, felt his hands tremble, not from fear of the bandits, but from the shame of never having taken the lead. A mother, silently hugging her children, realized she might be teaching them to remain silent in the face of injustice. And even the sheriff, who wore the star of authority on his chest, felt dwarfed by the unexpected greatness of a boy who decided to act. It was as if Sam had ripped away the veil of resignation that covered Redstone and, with a gesture, shown that another reality was possible. And it's interesting to note how the journey of transformation often begins this way, with something seemingly small, but which carries within it the power to change mindsets. Sam didn't make a speech, didn't plan a strategy, didn't calculate the consequences. He simply chose not to give in to fear. And this choice, simple in form but grand in essence, was enough to shake the foundations of an entire city. Because in the end, what truly inspires is not perfection, but the imperfect courage born. Amidst chaos, dust still hung in the air when Jedediah's body finally gave in to the weight of death, lying forever on the dry Redstone ground. But curiously, it wasn't the silence of death that dominated the atmosphere, but rather the invisible echo of what he had left behind. More than a gunslinger marked by the past, Jedediah became in that moment a kind of symbol, someone who, with that final gesture of trust, had planted in Sam a seed that no one could uproot. The boy, who until recently had been just another orphan forgotten in the corners of the city, now carried within him something that transformed his very existence, the courage to decide. And therein lies the true lesson hidden in this story. Courage was never about brawn or experience, but about mindset. Jedediah knew that the gun itself meant nothing if it didn't come with the awareness of when and why to use it. He could have chosen to let the revolver fall to the dust, to end his days without passing on the burden, but he chose to place his bet on someone unlikely, someone the entire town wouldn't take seriously, and in doing so, he revealed a hidden truth that often troubles. Often, it's precisely those we least expect who become capable of carrying the torch of change. Sam didn't ask to be a hero. He didn't seek the weight of such huge decisions, but when he accepted responsibility, even with trembling hands, he took a step few adults have the courage to take. This shows how life has a peculiar way of placing us at crossroads that seem bigger than ourselves. In these moments, fear screams, doubt paralyzes, and everything inside us wants to retreat. But real transformation happens when we choose to act, even without guarantees, even without certainty. Because deep down, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the conscious choice to move forward despite it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the lesson revealed here goes beyond the Redstone frontier and the fate of a boy. It touches on something universal, something every human being has faced on their journey. How many times have you faced situations where you seemed too small, too fragile, or too inexperienced to take on responsibility, and yet there was a call within you not to run away? It is at this precise point that life's most intense revelations arise, when the choice to act is not driven by the certainty of victory, but by the knowledge that not acting would be a silent defeat. Jedediah's impact wasn't in the shots he fired in life, but in the way he handed over to another, backstage during his final fight, something that represented much more than a gun. It was an act of trust that changed not only Sam, but the entire town. Because when people saw that boy raise his gun, they didn't just see a boy. They saw living proof that courage is a decision, and that greatness can blossom in the most unlikely places. And that's what remains as time marches on, not the sound of gunshots, but the echo of choices. The boy who once tended horses now carried with him the memory of a gunslinger who believed in him, and that memory would be the strength that guided him in his next steps. After all, Jedediah left his life in the desert, but his greatest legacy wasn't fame nor the stories told in the saloon. It was the seed planted in Sam, showing that courage doesn't depend on age, size, or social standing, but on the firm choice to act when everything pushes you in the opposite direction. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains as the dust raised by the last confrontation dissipated, revealing a town still stunned. Redstone would never be the same after that night. On the ground, the gun that had once rested in Jedediah's steady hands now seemed tailor-made for the trembling fingers of Sam, a boy who, before everyone's eyes, had transformed fear into courage. The promise made to the gunslinger on his deathbed wasn't just about holding a revolver, but about upholding a legacy. And that detail now made all the difference. That metal object, simple in appearance, carried the hidden truth of a greater journey. That strength lies not in iron, but in the resolve of the one who wields it. The residents, still hiding behind doors and windows, finally began to emerge. A timid step here, another there, as if testing the waters to see if they were truly free from the grip of fear. And it was in this collective movement that the impact of Sam's gesture was revealed. He not only defended the town, but ignited something that had long seemed extinguished: hope. People who had previously resigned themselves to waiting for a savior realized that transformation could be born within them too, and this revelation, more than the victory over the bandits, was what truly marked Redstone. The story's opening scene, which seemed like a mere chance encounter between a dying cowboy and an unsuspecting boy, now closed like a complete arc. The gun, the promise, and the town's fate were connected like pieces of the same puzzle. Jedediah was gone, but he left Sam with a reflection of what truly defines a hero. Not titles, not fame, not grandiose stories, but the courage to act when everything tells him it's best to retreat. And it's at this point that the saying comes to life. Sometimes the greatest heroes are born from the most unlikely choices. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this reflection isn't just about the Wild West or distant characters. It speaks directly to how each of us views our own lives. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we're the unlikely, where everything seems to indicate we're not the right person to take on a certain responsibility? It's precisely in these moments that decisions shape destinies. The unlikely only becomes impossible when we choose not to try. And it's curious how, behind the scenes of our personal journey, what seems small can have a gigantic impact. A courageous gesture, a word spoken at the right time, a choice no one expected. All of these can redefine not only who we are, but the course of everyone around us. Sam never imagined he would be remembered as a symbol of resistance and transformation, but his mindset in that simple moment changed everything. And this shows that each of us, at some point along the way, will also hold in our hands the symbolic weapon that carries responsibility and legacy. Redstone's fate was not written by the force of criminals, nor by the silence of the community, but by the unlikely decision of one boy. And perhaps this is the most powerful message. Life doesn't require us to be perfect, only that we be willing to act when the moment arises. It is in this surrender, in this choice, that the most profound revelations and stories that echo through generations emerge. Getting this far already shows that this story spoke to you in some way, and that's precisely why I want to extend this invitation in a very simple way. If this content sparked reflection, if it somehow touched your mindset and made you think about courage, choices, and transformation, please leave a like, because it shows me that it's worth continuing to share these deeply moving stories. And if you feel this kind of message has value in your journey, subscribe to the channel. This way we'll continue together, creating this space for exchange and inspiration that goes far beyond a simple video. And since you stuck with me until the end, comment below, "I'm with you until the end." It's my way of knowing that you truly walked through every detail of this narrative and that you were part of this complete experience. Now, if you want to continue with that same energy, there's another story right here that will move you too. Click and stay with me there, because I'm sure this next stop on our journey will be worth it.